For months, he was the face of the government's COVID response. Now, the reporter who helped Matt Hancock write his memoirs has handed over all the WhatsApp messages he entrusted to her to the Telegraph. On day one of its account of his messages, the Telegraph focused on one from April 2020, when the government's top advisers said they wanted COVID testing for all those going into care homes. Matt Hancock WhatsApped his aide, "Tell me if I'm wrong, but I would rather leave it out and just commit to test and isolate all going into care from hospital. I do not think the community commitment adds anything, and it muddies the waters." The Telegraph is saying he's ignoring the advice of Chris Whitty. What do you say?
There was clinical advice and there was operational reality. Matching clinical advice with operational reality is the job of Secretaries of State.
So Matt Hancock, you would say, is just trying to ration what available resources there are on testing. He's not rejecting the advice.
Rationing is an emotive word. He's prioritising the scarce resources we had.
You knew there was a need to be testing people who were going into care homes from all different settings, but you couldn't fulfil that need at the time.
Exactly. And
but that wasn't a protective arm. Maybe Matt Hancock shouldn't have been talking about this protective arm. He knew it wasn't fully protective.
Well, we took the arm that we had and threw it as protectively as we possibly could do.
What else is still to come?
There is lots still to come, Bev, across a whole range of subjects.
Richard Tice, the leader of Reform UK, was trailing more of the WhatsApp messages his partner, Isabel Oakeshott, has given to the Telegraph. The anti-lockdown cause unites them all. Should Matt Hancock have been handing over a whole series of WhatsApps to do with government business to a journalist and her campaigning partner, who seems to have his hands on them as well?
Clearly not. I mean, it's clearly an unwise thing to have done.
Today, the Telegraph released messages from the WhatsApp group showing Boris Johnson questioning shielding, asking for comments on an article from The Spectator, and in late August 2020, asking a high-powered WhatsApp group of top advisers what the mortality rate of COVID was. I've just read somewhere it's fallen to 0.04% from 0.1%. So by my maths, that's down from 1 in 1,000 to about 1 in 2,000. The Chief Medical Officer and the government's Chief Scientific Advisor both responded it was between 0.4 and 1. Boris Johnson responded, "Eh? So what is 0.04 if it isn't a percentage? 5 marks, show working." His top aide, Dominic Cummings, responded, 0.04 as a probability means 4%. He then showed his working. But the Prime Minister maths seems to be at a rather elementary level.
No, I don't accept that. Both Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson have very good maths. The other thing, though, that we shouldn't forget is how little we understood about this disease. There was a moment when we were very unclear about whether domestic pets or not could transmit the disease. In fact, there was an idea at one moment that we may have to ask the public to exterminate all the cats in Britain. Can you imagine what would have happened if we had wanted to do that? And yet there was, for a moment, a little bit of evidence about that. So that had to be investigated and closed down.
Keir Starmer demanded a speeding up of the COVID public inquiry that's barely started.
The COVID inquiry has already cost the taxpayer £85 million and hasn't heard from a single government minister yet. So can the Prime Minister assure the House no more delays, that the inquiry will have whatever support it needs to report by the end of this year?
Minister, he will know, as he has mentioned it 1 or 2 times before, that he was a lawyer in a previous life, that there is a proper process to these things. It is an independent inquiry. It has the resources it needs. It has the powers it needs. And what we should all do in this House is let them get on and do their job.
I wish to emphasise there will be no whitewash.
Baroness Hallett, the COVID inquiry chair, responding to the Daily Telegraph, saying it feared just that. Matt Hancock said the Telegraph had doctored stolen messages to create a false story about his role through the COVID crisis.
Well, joining me now are Nadra Ahmed, chairman of the National Care Association, and Dr. Hannah White, director of the Institute for Government think tank. Nadra Ahmed, let's just remind people that Matt Hancock, of course, said the government had thrown a protective ring around care homes, despite the fact tens of thousands of people died in care homes. What did you think today?
Well, I mean, I think when he uttered those words, I was very scathing because there was obviously no protective ring around social care. They may have been around the NHS, and we understood why that might be. What I heard today just reinforces that some of the challenges that we knew we were facing may have been averted. But we don't know that, and I think the detail will need to come out before we can be very, very clear about it. But it is a lot of passion that will be out there from people who've lost loved ones, who will read this and think, well, you know, they may have been able to have been saved.
Do you accept there are good reasons why the inquiry is taking so long? There's a huge amount of material to get through, or do you think it could have been quicker?
Well, I think it should have been quicker. I think it could have started a little bit earlier. I think evidence has been called. They've got quite a lot of evidence from what I understand. So I think it could have been quicker. But with all these things, there is a process, and we are a process-driven society, aren't we?
Let me just bring in Hannah White. I mean, what do you make of sort of the Keystone Cops nature of this? You know, exterminating cats. A Prime Minister whose maths is sort of sub-14-year-old.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems as though the extermination of cats might well be in itself the ultimate dead cat strategy in this context, and throwing out something...
Yes, maybe something to distract, yeah.
Yes, but I think, I mean...
But, I mean, look, that exchange that was months into the pandemic. This wasn't the beginning of the pandemic. This was 6 months into the pandemic, and Boris Johnson doesn't know the difference between probability and percentages. I mean, it's shocking.
Well, I think what the exchanges very clearly show is these interactions between advisors, between ministers, between the chief scientific advisor and civil servants, and the fact that those conversations have to go on as people, as knowledge about this disease was evolving, people were trying to apply, and they were trying to do things like avoiding U-turns by making sure they understood what the evidence was at any given time. But whether it was appropriate for that to be going on via WhatsApp, and whether proper records were kept of that and those decisions for the sort of, for now, for the inquiry to be looking at, that's the question which I think is important.
Well, what difference does WhatsApp make? You know, I mean, it is apparently a record. You know, it's there. It's been kept.
Well, in some ways, it's no different to the informal conversations that ministers and advisors would have been having, you know, throughout history in corridors and so on. I think the difference is it's a technology which has developed, which people naturally use. There's nothing inherently wrong with using WhatsApp amongst people who work in government, as long as people understand that when decisions are being made, those are recorded for posterity, for things like the COVID inquiry.
As they haven't been by Lord Bethel, who we saw in that in Gary Gibbons' piece.
So that there can be sufficient transparency. But there are also risks around the use of WhatsApp, that you haven't got all the people in a WhatsApp group that you might think need to be there, that need to be cited on it. Also, I think the fact that we've had different interpretations from Matt Hancock and from the Telegraph of what was being said highlights the very reality that when you're doing your text speak and writing your notes on WhatsApp, exactly what is being communicated might well be less clear than it would be in a meeting when you've got proper briefing and presentations being made. So there are risks there that need to be managed, and it's not clear that government is doing that well enough.
Nadra Ahmed, when you look at the way decisions were being made, I mean, obviously, there was a lot of data going on, things were moving very, very quickly. So social media enables them to be in close contact all the time. Do you see that as an advantage, or as something that created this sort of chaotic dialogue that was going on?
Well, I feel like it was probably a little bit chaotic because it was quite reactive, some of it. And I mean, we don't know what else is going to be revealed. But to me, you know, WhatsApp is one of those where you can type something quite quickly and get some information across. But actually, it's that really important thing about logging the detail and how those decisions are made. And it felt very chaotic. I mean, the guidance that we were getting was you know, 2 a day, and it was chaotic. We were being told to do this 1 minute and that the next minute. So how were those decisions being made as to, you know, what the care homes were being told to do? How was the decisions around the use of PPE being made? Because we had 11 iterations of that within a very short period of time. So if you think that it was all being done via WhatsApp, it is a worrying scenario.
Nadra Ahmed and Hannah White, thank you both very much.